black on either side of the American flag, new camera, new microphone.
Looking good.
Thank you, sir. I'm moving on up. But
all right,
we were supposed to do a couple weeks ago, but because I'm an idiot and didn't read it, now we are Friends of the Family, which will be on Audible, or not on Audible, be in the description, sticking in the top comment, points deducted because it's not on Audible. Don't want to do that to you, but I have to.
Well, that was before the Audible thing was really in vogue, So
excuses.
Yes, that's what happened.
Yeah, but it is, and I say this as a good thing. It's definitely one of the most fucked up books I've ever read. It's definitely I mean, you said it when you mentioned it in when you talked about the body snatchers in your other book, Crooked Brooklyn, which is on Audible for everybody listening, and anybody that, like me, plays video games. Grand Theft Auto 4, it reminds me a lot of Grand Theft Auto 4. And then reading this book, Friends of the Family, I just believe that even more now. It sounds like fictional shit, but just having your cops, having the mob, having their cops on the payroll, and just saying, because that's one thing you can do in the video game, is you can get in a cop car, get a cop's uniform, the mob tells you, hey, look up Bobby Bag of Donuts, you put it into the computer system, you go there, you flash your lights, you're like, sorry man, you got a ticket, and then you blow his brains out. But that's actually what happened. That's actually what happened in real life.
Well, that happened with these guys, yeah, absolutely. They if you remember back to the beginning, we didn't talk a lot about this or write a lot about this in the book, but these guys were doing this, and that's Eppolito and Caracappa are the name of the two detectives. I mean, they were doing this well before they got involved with the cases that we broke the investigation open with.
Yeah.
They had been working for the Gambinos before, and they had been passing along information and doing the same kinds of things they did with the Lucchese family, which is who they ultimately hooked up with through Gas Pipe Casso.
Yeah.
So these guys were veterans at this thing. They and the reason that they moved from the Gambinos to the Lucchese's was because Eppolito's cousin was a wise guy with the Gambino family, and they killed him for some reason. I forgot the reason why, but they killed him. So he was, he got pissed off and decided that he wasn't going to help them anymore. And fortunately, they hooked up with a guy named Kaplan, and that was that put them on to Gas Pipe Casso, who was a Lucchese, I guess at that point, kind of co-underboss. He was not the boss. He was on the lam at various times. So he was, but he was way up there in the family. Mm-hmm. And he called them his crystal ball.
Yeah.
Because he was able to, to kind of look in and find out who was doing what through their eyes, you know. So,
it definitely had some elements that reminded me of The Departed. I'm sure you've seen that movie, right?
Yeah.
Exactly. When they're going to the warehouse and they're giving the fake, cruise missile computer chips to the Chinese mafia, and their inside guy says no phones, and they're using the Patriot Act to watch everyone, and all of a sudden all the phones shut off, and he's like, please tell me Chinamen did not just get into that car. But you talked about how going up in investigations, all of a sudden phones just go dead, disappear off the map, and they're like, what just happened? Everyone there just digitally went into the void, just vanished.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, the interesting thing about it is that one of the early murders that these guys did occurred in a garage, in an automobile garage, a repair shop. Yeah. And after they killed a guy who Gas Pipe thought was an informant, they then had to break up the cement in the garage. They got the poor schmuck who was the owner of the garage to break up the floor, and then put this guy in, and then cement it over. And it wasn't until we got involved much later on, and then the feds got involved, that they were able to to get that tear up that floor and find the remains of this guy. So. So it's interesting. There was a garage involved in this. So
yeah, but I mean, even how the book starts, and it's just you go up and I mean, and this isn't spoiling it for anybody listening, but the way they go up, and it's just, you kind of walk up on either side, and it's, what's that on the ground? I thought what they were going to do is scream gun, but no, it was even worse. They're like, what's that on the ground? And the guy bends over and just pow, 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 pow.
Yeah.
That
was Eddie Leno.
Yeah.
So, the one thing I tell your audience, that this is kind of this whole hour part of this was it involved kind of a domino kind of effect that goes back to the killing of Paul Castellano by John Gotti and Sammy the Bull Gravano. Mm-hmm. They kill him because Gotti wants to take over the Gambino family, and they don't get permission, which is one of the rules of the mafia, that in order to hit a made guy, and let alone a boss, you need to get the okay from the ruling commission. They did not get it. They just did it as they want, they will want to do. Gotti was a cowboy, Gravano was a cowboy, so they just set this up and they kill him. Now that set off a series of events with Gas Pipe Casso and the Lucchese family, the Vincent the Chin Gigante, and the Genovese family. They said, this can't stand. We can't allow this to happen, because they're thinking of themselves. One of them could get killed one day.
Yeah.
So what happens is they give the okay. They, meaning the commission, give the okay for Gas Pipe to kill John Gotti. And I get this story after the fact directly from Gas Pipe Casso. I go to visit him down in federal prison in Butner, North Carolina, because he sends word up through another informant that I had that he wanted to see me. So I go down there, and I verify this whole story that I had and that we had, that he did attempt to kill Gotti. They got this munitions expert from the Army to build a bomb, like an IED.
Yeah.
And put it underneath a car that they thought Gotti was going to be in, because he visited a social club every Sunday morning with one of his boys, a guy named Tommy Bellotti. And they bring it, they were able to get this bomb underneath the car, and this munitions expert, and this is Gas Pipe telling me this, he said, Mike, I got to tell you, this is how crazy this guy was. He decided before he set the bomb off, he was going to do it through a radio transmission. He was going to go next to the car so that he would make sure that the radio waves were not interfered with, So he does. Yeah. He blows the car up. He destroys his own car, and he kills Bellotti, but he doesn't kill Gotti, because Gotti's not in the car.
Yeah.
So Gotti realizes at that point that who did this, who set this up. And he knew Gas Pipe was involved.
Yeah.
So he now sets up a team of guys to go kill Gas Pipe. And they follow him to his neighborhood, which is out in the Georgetown section of Brooklyn, kind of Canarsie-ish in that area. And he's at a light, waiting in his car with a light. And these guys pull up, and they open fire on him. And Gas Pipe is able to duck down. He gets hit, but he's not dead. He crawls out of the car, and he makes his way into the basement of a Chinese restaurant in the neighborhood there. And he sits in the Chinese restaurant, basically bleeding until he gets some help, and then gets help. But now he's on a vendetta. He has to find out who those guys were in the car. And he starts this kind of rapid. No, I shouldn't say rapid. I think it was a slow kind of investigation into who was in that car. And who does he use? He uses the mafia cops, Eppolito and Caracappa, to find out what they can about who the killers were, or who the shooters were, I should say. And then that sets off a series of homicides that the mafia cops were involved in. Eddie Leno, the guy that you mentioned, he's one of the four guys in the car that was shooting at Gas Pipe, and he's the cousin of another mobster named Frankie Leno. So they find him on the Belt Parkway, which is a highway in Brooklyn. He gets off, and they pull him over in a radio car that looks like in an unmarked car. Looks like a police car, one of those Crown Victorias that they used to use, and they stop him. And you obviously read the book, so you know the story. What he says immediately is they asked for his cousin. That's the ruse. And he says, "Oh, fellas, you got the wrong guy. You're the wrong guy. That's my cousin." And then one of them says, "What's that on the floor?" And he then leans over, and one of the cops, it's Caracappa, who shoots him in the head and kills him. So that's how one of them is killed. Now, the one that really breaks the case open is the Frankie Heidel murder. They find out that a guy named Frankie Heidel, through sources, is one of the guys in the car, and they realize that they know that he's a weak link. He and his brother Jimmy were kind of hanger-ons, guys that that like to be part of the mob but actually weren't. And they go to, meaning the mafia cops, once they get the name, they go to his mother's house in Staten Island and ask for him. They actually do something before. Excuse me, I missed this. They stop his brother Jimmy, and I'm sorry. They stop his brother Frankie. It's Jimmy who was killed by the cops. It's Frankie. They stop Frankie. He says again, "It's not me. You're looking for my brother. I'm not. That's not my brother. I'm not Jimmy. I'm Frankie." So they then go to the house, and he goes to his house. I'm sorry, and he tells his mother what happened. And the mother goes out. Believe it or not,
she goes out and finds them
out into the street.
What are you doing to my son?
And finds these guys in a car and confronts them. And they say, "Oh, it's police business. Get away, ma'am," etc. But she gets a good look at both of them.
Yeah.
And when Frankie comes home, he tells her about getting stopped. I'm sorry. Later on, they're waiting for Jimmy to come home, and obviously Jimmy is never going to come home. What happens is they get a tip from somebody that he's in Brooklyn, and they drive over to the Bensonhurst section of Brooklyn, and Jimmy is hiding out because he's got a sense that someone's looking for him. Word is on the street that Gas Pipe has got feelers out looking for people who shot him, and he sees the cops, and the cops call him over to the car, the two detectives. And he's relieved that they're detectives because he thought, "Oh man, I'm dead." He thought they were wise guys. Turns out they actually are.
Yeah.
And they get him in the car and they tell him, "We're going to the precinct." And he lets his guard down. He says, "Okay, I'm happy about that." And instead, they drive him to the parking lot of a big Toys R Us store that was in the Flatbush section of Brooklyn, and in that parking lot, they turn him over to Gas Pipe and his thugs. Now, what happens is, and we find this out later on, and then we ultimately find the house where Gas Pipe takes him. He had a place set up. It was owned by one of the Lucchese guys, and they bring Jimmy down to the basement. And they basically torture him for information. And he gives up all of the names. Lino was one of the names he gave up. So Lino happens after they kill Jimmy. He gives up a guy named Nicky Guido, who I'll tell you about in a second. And he gives up a fourth name. I can't remember the name now. But it doesn't make a difference. He gets killed, but not in a way that I think his name was Delappy. That's what it was. And he gets killed. He escapes and goes to California because he knows that things are going down. So anyway, after Jimmy is killed, I say to Gas Pipe when I spoke to him many years later, I said, "What'd you do with Jimmy's body?" Because I'd like to give the information to his mother to kind of close the circle and bring some closure.
Yeah.
And he told me where he dumped the body. There was a big housing development being built in that Georgetown section of Brooklyn. And it was a construction site. And they meaning the wise guys, knew the one of the people who operated a bulldozer on the site. So they were able to go in the middle of the night. They got the bulldozer. They bulldozed some earth. They dumped the body in, bulldozed it over, or put the dirt over it, and then later on it got built. The whole housing development was built, and it was basically concrete and houses, and that's where Jimmy Heidel's body is.
Yeah.
So that led to Leno, and then to me the worst one, the one that ultimately breaks the case open.
The kid, yeah.
It is the kid, Nicky Guido.
Yeah.
And you want me to tell you the Nicky Guido story?
Yeah. Well, I was going to say before that.
Yeah, go ahead.
There's an interesting parallel between, I think, what Ron Paul coined the term blowback, and it's like when we fly a drone over wherever, Syria, and we try to blow up, they're all just tracking metadata, so they're just firing at points on like a digital map, and they blow up who they think is a terrorist. Maybe it is a terrorist, but then it also takes out a cafe with 5 guys, 4 sons, and a couple wives. Right. Now all of a sudden you take these guys who actually were just humans, they weren't terrorists, they're just dealt a bad hand and grew up in a war zone. They now become terrorists, or their family members do, because they're like, that, American drone just, vaporized my family. And he calls it blowback, and it creates more terrorists, and then the terrorists attack us, and we go, what the hell? So we go back over there and bomb them. But you kind of see it with this, right? It's the bomb goes off but doesn't kill Gotti. Gotti sends out his hit team. Hit team doesn't kill him, so he finds his guys, and it just turns into this thing. And it's like, can you even ever trace back the first thing? And it's like, I feel like it goes back to like 1800, like Gangs of New York shit, and it's just still going back and forth.
It could very well, and that's why I talk about the domino effect. It went from, the Castellano to the attempt on Gotti to the attempt on Gas Pipe, and then to all of these murders that are attached to the Gas Pipe shooting, and they were all traced back. You can trace them all back to, to the first one, which was the Castellano shooting, and it's a point that's I think it's a very important point, because it does show the continuation. These were not just isolated events that were happening. They were all tied together, and they're tied, and they run all the way back to, Castellano getting killed at Sparks Steakhouse that night in December on the street in Manhattan.
Yeah.
So,
let's do the Nicky Guido story.
Yeah, the tragedy. They're not that other murders aren't tragedies, and the name that I was looking for before was Borriello. Bobby Borriello was another guy in the car. So Nicky Guido, they get the name from Jimmy Heidel, and they don't know where he lives. They meaning Gas Pipe and his people. So he tries several methods before he finally goes to the cops. And he says to his in-between, there's a middleman, and that's this guy, Bert Kaplan. Gas Pipe never really deals with the cops directly. He's got this middleman, and it's Kaplan. And Kaplan is the guy who set them up together. Kaplan knew that Gas Pipe could employ them, and once they meaning the cops, were no longer working for the Gambinos, Kaplan saw an opportunity for himself and also for Gas Pipe to use these guys. So he meaning Gas Pipe asks Kaplan to find out what he can about Nicky Guido and where he lived. So he gives the job to Caracappa. Now Caracappa was basically he was a detective in the major case squad, but the organized crime section of the major case squad of the NYPD. So he had access to all kinds of information about mob guys. He had access to the obviously to the NYPD computer. So what he does is he signs into the computer, the NYPD computer. Remember, he's a working detective at this point.
Yeah.
And he puts the name in Nicky Guido, and he finds a name that, they had an idea about what this guy's age was. They had an idea as to basically, they had some ideas as to where he lived. So they find a name that is Nicky Guido, same as what they're looking for, about the same age. He lived in what's called the Windsor Terrace area of Brooklyn, near Prospect Park. And he says, meaning Caracappa, says, this is the guy. So he gives the information to Kaplan, who gives it in turn to Gas Pipe. Mm-hmm. Gas Pipe sends 2 hit guys out on Christmas morning. And Nicky Guido is out on the street showing his uncle his brand new car. He got a brand new car at Christmas time. This red car was beautiful. And while the uncle and Nicky are in the car, a car pulls up next to them and they open fire. And Nicky jumps on his uncle so his uncle wouldn't get hit, and he gets hit and he dies. Well, it turns out that's not the Nicky Guido who was a wise guy. That's a kid who worked for the phone company, who was as innocent as can be. He just happened to have the wrong name, happened to have the wrong age, and he happened to live in the wrong area because they thought that this is where the Nicky Guido would be looking. And I'll tell you how that kind of plays a big role in breaking the case open in a minute. After that happens, the real Nicky Guido at some point finds out about this, and he quickly turns himself in to the police because he realizes that he's a dead man if he stays out in the street. Yeah. Now, how does that help us? 2 ways. One, when I get the case, my friend Tommy Dades and I, a detective, we started this investigation. He comes to me and tells me that he had information from Jimmy Heidel's mom, which she kept to herself for years. And what she kept to herself was the idea that these 2 guys came to her, that she confronted these 2 detectives on the street when they went after Frankie, her other son, and she got a good look at them. And years later, she finds out when she's watching the Sally Jesse Raphael show, which was a talk show at that point, a very popular one, that Ippolito had written this book called Mafia Cop. And so she recognizes him immediately. She says, wait a second, that's the guy that went after Frankie. So she goes to a bookstore and buys the book. And in the middle of the book where the pictures are, she sees a picture that Ippolito put in there of him and Caracappa together in a squad room. Yeah. Now she says, that's the second guy. So she kept it to herself for a little while, but then she went to the FBI. The FBI didn't want to have anything to do with her. She couldn't get anybody to pay attention. About a year or so after that, Frankie Heidel is an informant as well. He gets killed. And Tommy Dades catches the case. He was a detective in the precinct out there, and he catches that murder, and he starts to investigate the Frankie Heidel murder. Gets to know Mrs. Heidel very well, and they become very close. So she never told Tommy about the incident involving Caracappa and Ippolito until one day, years later, she says, there's something that's been bothering me for a long time. I never told you. Yeah. And she tells him the story about the Frankie, about the Sally Jesse Raphael, about the book, etc.
Yeah. Yeah. Didn't she say, she's like, I told the FBI and they didn't do anything. So I figured Correct. If they couldn't, you couldn't.
Right. So Tommy comes to me. We have been doing cold cases for a while now. He comes to me and he says, you want to do this? And I said, yeah, absolutely. Now, I used to work as the head of the police department's disciplinary. I was the chief prosecutor in the police department for a while. And I knew about Ippolito. I didn't know about Caracappa, but I knew that Ippolito was a guy who was always on the radar of internal affairs because family were all wise guys, and and then he writes this stupid book, Mafia Cop, in which he talks about how he was the only good guy, his family was horrible, he was great, that kind of thing. So we open up the investigation, and we kind of hit a dead end until Tommy finds the computer printout, Caracapa's computer printout of him searching for Nicky Guido. And it's buried among boxes. We had like 10 or 12 boxes of documents that we picked up from the feds who had these guys way back when, 10 years before us. And he comes down to me into my office and he says, Mike, we got him. Look at this. Caracappa searched. Look at the name he comes up with and look at where it happened. Look at where he lived. And we now had we had the beginnings of this investigation. We knew that we were on the right track. So now we had Mrs. Heidel. We now had this piece of information. But, Tom, what happens in these cases is because the witnesses generally, and when I say witnesses, I don't mean eyewitnesses, people you call to give you little bits and pieces. And these kinds of cases are not the most reliable. So you can't go with just two little pieces of information. You got to keep building. And it came to a point where I said, listen, we need something else. We need some inside person to turn. And the first place I went was the gas pipe, because I felt that here's a guy who at that point had turned himself in, had been charged with, I think, 13 or 14 murders, maybe even more. He was doing time. He had no chance, unless he helped us, of getting any kind of sentence reduction. And so I figured, let's take a shot. Let's see if I can turn him, if he'll agree. Mm-hmm. I reached out to his lawyer. His lawyer said, let me talk to him. But I'll tell you, Mike, what I want you to do is I need to get you to grant immunity to him for the Jimmy Heidel murder. Mm-hmm. I said, that's the easiest thing in the world. Are you kidding? Absolutely. It's a Brooklyn case. I can give it to you. He said, no, not you. I know you'll give it to me. I want the feds to give it to me as well. I said to him, your client is doing 17 life sentences, plus like 460 years on top of that. What is immunity going to do for him with this particular case? He goes, no, that's what I want, but I'll talk to my client and present it to him. So anyway, make a very long story short, I get a call back a week or two later. And he says, my client says no, he wants immunity. Well, I'm going to fast forward a couple of years. When I go to meet Gas Pipe down in Butner, North Carolina, he was in a federal prison hospital. He had prostate cancer. I talked to him and I say, so I got to we really got into this. And he says, I got to tell you something, counselor. He says, I always wanted to help you. I said, well, why didn't you? He said, my lawyer on his own told you that I didn't want to help you. I always wanted to. That's why I asked you to come down now and talk to me, because I wanted to help you, and I would have given up those guys. Now, how was I to know that? Because the lawyer was my only connection to him, and he was telling me he wasn't going to help. So we hit a dead end, Tom. We really hit a dead end. And I didn't know that the feds, who originally had no interest in this case at all and told us that we were crazy to go do this because they would never break this case open. Now that we were starting to make some progress, I hear that they now began an investigation.
Well, because they didn't want him to, right? It had something to do with Gotti, correct?
Yes. What happened was Gas Pipe, at some point after Gotti was convicted, sent the feds a letter saying that Sammy the Bull Gravano, when he testified, was basically full of shit.
Yeah.
Excuse my French. But I guess this is a podcast.
Yeah, you can say that. You can say whatever the fuck you want. Yeah, no, they were like, he's basically saying that guy's a liar, and if he turns out to be a liar, the whole thing's fucked. It gets thrown out on a technicality.
Correct. That's right. So they had no interest in giving Gas Pipe any kind of play at all. They would not allow him to touch. They didn't want us anywhere near him. So I went to them and said, listen, here's what I have. I have this guy agreeing to, will through his lawyer, will testify for me if you guys just give him immunity in a case that you have no interest in. You already got him for 17 life sentences. What's the interest? They were so pissed at him. They said to me, we wouldn't give that guy, a glass of water if it was the last thing that he could, to help him survive. We wouldn't do it.
Yeah.
We wouldn't do it. We're not doing it. So, again, I was stuck. But then I find out that they really started to get the urge to keep going. And they had an ace in the hole. And the ace in the hole was this guy, Bert Kaplan. Kaplan was the mastermind of this marriage between the two cops and the Lucchese's, and Gas Pipe in particular. So he had all the information we needed. If we got him to turn, he gives us the case. And then we use all of the other things that we discovered, Heidel's mother and the ultimately the guy that was buried in the garage and Eddie Leno, all of this stuff all falls into place nicely. But I was told by the feds that Kaplan was not interested in turning, that they tried to turn him years before. He took a big, heavy sentence on a very, very heavy drug trafficking charge and kept his mouth shut because he was not a rat, according to him. So I had no place to turn because I could offer Kaplan nothing. Mm-hmm. He was in a federal facility. I would have to get the feds to agree to give him a break on his sentence, even though I knew that he was elderly and he was sick. But I had to depend on them. Now what they did is on their own, not even telling me, they began a grand jury investigation, and I find it out just in happenstance. The chief investigator from my office, Joe Ponzi, is sitting with me one day, and he had been involved with us at the very beginning of this case. And he said, Mike, they're in the grand jury on this. I said, what? How could they be in a grand jury? They haven't kept us up to speed. We're working on this thing together. He said, they're in the grand jury, and they're going after Kaplan. And I said, how can they do that? They told us he wasn't interested. Well, as it turns out, what they did was they were working together with, they wouldn't tell me, but they grabbed Ponzi, and they had asked him to come with them to interview Kaplan along with their investigator. They went to the jail and they got Kaplan, and Kaplan basically said, I'm not a rat. I'm not giving anything to you. You can't help me. And they said, look, your daughter, who by the way was a judge, a criminal court judge in Brooklyn. It's interesting that he had this terrific daughter who was and I knew who she was. She used to work in legal aid. Now she was a judge. Mm-hmm. He had just had a kid, so he was a grandfather. We knew that he was probably dying, and they tried every single way of trying to get him to agree to testify, because they promised him that if he did, they would be able to get him out of jail, and he'd be able to see his grandchild, and meet his daughter again. Nothing. So I'm not a rat. I'm not a rat. I'm not a rat. Well, he gets up, and as he's walking out of the room, Ponzi says to him, "You think it was right that they killed that kid, Nicky Guido?" So Joe tells me later on that he stopped. He literally stopped. And he turned around. And to make, again, a long story short, he sat down, and Ponzi said to him,
everything, yeah.
Tell me that that's not the worst thing you heard in terms of this case. And he basically, that got him. It got him. That bringing those guys to justice for that murder was what turned Bert Kaplan.
Yeah.
Kaplan became a witness. Now, the case was taken away from us. Actually, I shouldn't say that. I'll tell you how it happened. we were looking at the Nicky Guido homicide, which is what we would have prosecuted them on.
Mm-hmm.
So the feds came to me one day and they said, listen, here's our proposition. We know you guys broke this thing open. We know how much work you guys done. We know that your boss is anxious to report, to announce this, etc. But if the Nicky Guido case gets tried separately from now what could be a RICO case, a much bigger federal RICO case, there's a hole. There's a hole in this thing. So let us do the case, the RICO case, with the Nicky Guido homicide as part of one of the underlying charges. And when we make the arrest and do the announcement, your boss can take credit, and you guys can take credit for everything. So I really didn't want to do this. I wanted to still do what I wanted to do, but I couldn't convince them that I could try the Nicky Guido case without hurting their RICO case. But they wouldn't have anything. They said, listen, go talk to your boss. So I did. He agreed. He said, listen, as long as we get credit, they can try it in federal court. It's okay. And that was the deal. We had a solid deal. We gave them the Nicky Guido case. We gave them all of our work. I had even an assistant DA assigned to the case with them, and they were going to try it together. We had our investigators working with their investigators. So it was a marriage that was perfect. And then one day I get a call from the same prosecutors who had been dealing with me and made the promise. And they said, deal's off. Somebody went to 60 Minutes and broke this thing. 60 Minutes was going to do a TV show, and they hadn't arrested Caracap and Ippolito yet. So they had to now quickly find them and arrest them before the 60 Minutes thing hit. And they blamed us for the leak. They said, it was your fault. They actually blamed our public information officer. Turns out later on, after the fact, I find out that the leak was a DEA agent who was working with the feds because the Caracap and Ippolito had moved to Las Vegas and was selling drugs in Las Vegas. The DEA agent was the one who leaked the information to the press, and that's how the whole thing got to 60 Minutes attention. But we took the brunt of the blame. They said we did it. The whole deal was off. The announcement was made in federal court when they arrested them, and they did a press conference. And although we did have a chance, we were doing a press conference on another case that day, and my boss took the opportunity to tell our story in terms of how we broke the case open that day. But it was it left a bad taste in my mouth. I'll never forget how they screwed me, and Tom, they lied, they just basically lied to me about this stuff. And and when I see now how the FBI and how the federal authorities operate and what they've done, over the last 4 or 5 years, it was not a surprise to me ever because of what happened, during this case. And it was, it was a very bad situation. And I looked like a jerk because I had cut the deal on behalf of my boss. He lost it. He said to me, look, Mike, I'm not even going to the press conference. Let you go and you stand up, you represent us, but I'm not going. I don't want to look like a jerk. And I didn't blame him because we had a solid deal. We gave up our end of the case, and it turned out to be not so good for us. So, but what happened, this is another interesting thing. What happens is they bring this RICO based on the fact that Ippolito and Caracappa were running an organization out in Las Vegas selling drugs.
Yeah.
Because there was no continuing criminal enterprise. These guys were retired cops. They weren't involved with the gas pipe and then for well over 10 years.
Yeah.
But they bootstrapped this
contacts
thing. Yeah, out there. They had a undercover DEA informant pretend to be somebody in Hollywood, and that he was coming to Vegas to do some scouting for a location, and he wanted drugs, and they hooked him up with Caracappa and Ippolito, who had the ability to get him drugs. And that was enough in their minds to establish that these two guys were still operating together and that this continuing criminal enterprise was still continuing. I never bought it for a second, and I didn't think a federal judge would buy it either. But they indicted them, and the case ultimately went to trial in federal court on this flimsy continuing criminal enterprise in Vegas. And of course, given the evidence, because Kaplan testified at the trial, there was no chance they were going to lose this case, and they didn't. They won, right? They, meaning the feds, won. But what happens is the judge, who I thought was would have a problem with this, the judge dismisses the case. He says that this continuing criminal enterprise idea is so flimsy, it's non-existent, so you don't have a RICO, and the case can't be tried in federal court.
So it's not a continuing thing? Is that because it's like Tom Brady's going back to the Super Bowl? Like, you wouldn't say that this is like the Patriots' 10th Super Bowl, right? It's like he's moved on. As someone that doesn't know shit about law.
Okay, so I'll tell you what it is. These guys were operating together, working with the mob for the time that they were cops in New York, right? That ended probably about 9 to 10 years before we opened up the investigation. Mm-hmm. They were not operating together any longer. So for us in the state court, there was no continuing criminal enterprise. It had ended when they retired and moved out to Las Vegas. Okay, that's what the problem was with the feds. Why they had a very difficult time figuring out how they would prosecute these guys because of the length of time that existed between when they were operating together and now when they wanted to bring the indictment. So what did they do? They did enough searching and checking and investigating in Vegas, and they found a DEA agent who was doing an investigation into the fact that these two guys were selling drugs out there. Now, did it have anything to do with the original enterprise that they had, where they were killing people on behalf of the mob and providing information? No. But they said that these two guys together now working on the drug deals was a continuing thing, and connected it tenuously to what they were doing back in Brooklyn during the time of our during the time of that we were investigating. Okay. That's why I say it was very tenuous. It was not a strong connection. And a federal judge, a guy who's been on the bench forever, dismissed the case because he said, there is no continuing criminal enterprise. Don't tell me that drug thing, that's a new thing. That's something new. There's no connection to what they were doing in Brooklyn. So you can't bring all of these homicides, et cetera, in to say that it's a RICO case. That's the problem. Mm-hmm. So what happens is once that case gets dismissed, the feds were going to appeal it. Okay. And they told us they were going to appeal it, but they said to me, you better get ready because you're probably going to have to try this case. If we lose on appeal, then the only thing left are these individual murders. And now we're going to basically send them back to you so that you can try them. Mm-hmm. So I was now back to where I wanted to be in terms of getting ready to try these cases. All I had to do was wait for the decision from the federal appeals court. There was a good chance in my mind that the appeals court was going to go along with the decision by this long time sitting judge in Brooklyn. But they didn't. They reversed them, reinstated the conviction, and he then sentenced these guys to life. So I never got the chance, even though I was hoping against hope that the appeals court would would keep it's a very odd thing to be. I'm a prosecutor, and I wanted the case to be dismissed or stay dismissed, but I did for a reason, because I wanted it to come to Brooklyn and give me the opportunity to try him for the murder, particularly of Jimmy Heidel. I had more than enough. And now with Kaplan as a witness, it was an easy case to try. But they appealed the federal appeals court's decision, reinstating their conviction. They lost, and it never got to the Supreme Court because they didn't have an issue that the Supreme Court would take, and that was it. They got sentenced to life in prison, both of them, plus life plus many years.
Yeah.
One guy went to California, I think it was Eppolito. Another guy went to Texas, Caracappa. Don't hold me to that. It might have been vice versa. And Caracappa died several years ago, and then more recently, Eppolito died. But his daughter, Eppolito's daughter, maintained the fact that he was an innocent man, totally innocent man. He was not, Tom, believe me. He's the kind of guy he was. He bragged in Mafia Cop, his own book, that when he was a street cop, when he was a uniform cop, and he would arrest somebody for like domestic violence, or he made it a point to go back to the home of the victim, the woman, and oftentimes sweet-talked his way in and had sex with her. Now that's something that he said himself in his own book, and he was, it was sort of like to him like a red badge of courage. I think it was one of. So I knew what I was dealing with, and Eppolito and Caracappa, he was accepted in the police department during the Vietnam War, when a lot of guys were not applying for the PD because they weren't around. They were
drafted,
fighting. They were in the Army and the Marines and the Navy. So they lowered their standards. And he had a burglary conviction, Caracappa, in his background. And so these were not two guys who were as pure as the driven snow. And they were greedy. And I think that I remember when our guys, along with the FBI and the DEA, arrested them. They told me the story. My guys told me the story that these two guys, the Eppolito and Caracappa, was sitting in a restaurant, an Italian restaurant in Vegas, I think at lunchtime, when all of these guys came in. They were the most shocked guys in the world. Like, what are you doing here? What are you saying? Who are you arresting? Me? Well, for what? It was so many years later that they thought that they had gotten away with it, but they didn't.
Well, it's like what you said. You're like, in your book, you were like, I'm not trying to sound like the kind of the movie trope of this time it's personal, but you were like, but really, you're like, when it's me and all these guys, and you're on the force, and it's like you're working shitty hours for like not glorious pay, and you have guys that are so honorable they turn down a free cup of coffee, and they're bringing home $180 a week, and then you have Eppolito and Caracappa going in and getting $12,000 or $10,000 a month or $5,000 a month, and then they get a raise, and it's like, and they're turning these guys over with just like, without even, to the point where you were like, I imagine that they're just laughing about it because they're making so much money behind this badge that it's you're like, at a certain point it's personal, like.
Well, it became my boss, when he talked about it, and he said this right, it was one of the most heinous and worst corruption cases in the history of the NYPD. And it was. Think about, these guys were on the mob payroll. They were retained like a lawyer would be retained, They would get their money, and all they had to do, and I say that facetiously, was to just give information as to who was informing on Gas Pipe and other mobsters, and they got paid for that. And then if they did the killings, like they got paid extra for the Leno killing, they got paid extra for the Jimmy Heidel killing, and it was a horrible situation, and it was. And personally, Tom, I got to tell you, it was much more horrible in when I thought about it later on. because if you can't trust the guy who walks in with the badge in his hand, then it's all over. You know, I did a case once. I'll give you an example of what I'm talking about. I did a murder case. A family of Asian immigrants owned a liquor store in Brooklyn, and in the 80s, 90s, even into the early 2000s, the liquor stores in Brooklyn were, you walk in, you couldn't walk around the store and pick out. You had to operate. These guys operated behind plexiglass because it was so difficult. You know, it was so dangerous. So this guy walks into the liquor store and he says to the owner, shows a shield. He's a cop. And he says, "I need to use your bathroom. Can I use your bathroom?" Now he knew that the bathroom was behind the on the other side of the plexiglass. And of course, what do they say? Yeah, of course, come on in. Come on in. He gets behind the plexiglass, pulls a gun, and announces a stick-up. Then he tells him to let his partner in. He gets in. And after they rob the store, the cop says to his buddy,
"See my face."
They saw me. You know, they saw me. They got to go. And they kill us. They kill the owner of the store, shoot and attempt to kill his worker, but he doesn't die. He gets paralyzed. So, but the reason that he was in a position to do this cop, was because of that shield. He showed the shield and said, you know, I got to come in. And this poor guy, you know, let him in. I may have written this in Crooked Brooklyn, but
yeah.
I did. Okay. So you know that I go back years later and to try the case, and I want to see the store, and I walk in and with investigators, and we show our shields to the now his family is running the store, and they all like cringe, you know, they say, get out. And then we realize what we had done, the same thing that, the bad guy did. So
there's some,
but it's you know, it's a bad, a terrible disservice. It's really
it's what
it's really bad.
It's what Elon Musk described on his first time going on Joe Rogan. Is he talked about the inherent and this is a bit of an odd analogy, but I think it fits. And it's the inherent subsidy of corporations onto the climate, and it's that you know, because the charge brought against, not charge, but I guess public complaint a lot brought against Elon Musk is, Tesla gets all these federal stipends and shit. And he says all corporations in a sense get a stipend because if you're logging and you're just shredding it, and I'm not going on some Greenpeace rant, like I get it, we got to get shit.
I got it.
But he's like, for every company that they dump their sludge into a river, or, you know, they're burning all this shit into the atmosphere, or they're acidifying the oceans, there's an inherent subsidy from the population at large that these companies' profits are paid for by your decreasing air quality or less health. You know, you can't get a fish without it having mercury poisoning or something. And so there's an inherent subsidy that you're already paying to these companies because we're all on this in this biosphere together, right? We're all in the same pool and someone's pissing in it. And it's like, sure, you don't have to go pay to use the bathroom at Starbucks, but we're all paying now. You can say that what they did is there's an inherent subsidy on everyone with the badge. So for everyone that's gone to work every day, 6 days a week, and they did their 40 years on the squad, and they were stand-up guys, multiply that by every precinct and every state and every whatever, you build up this reputation, almost like a credit score, and then Caracappa and Eppolito come in, and by using that badge to just do whatever they want, they have, in a sense, you guys have all subsidized it, as you know, going in with your badges, and they're like, no, and you're like, shit. Like,
yep.
Odd analogy, but I had to draw it.
Yeah, no, you're exactly right. You know, it took us a good, half an hour to an hour to talk to these people, to tell them, once they realized that this was the family of the store owner who was killed.
Yeah.
once they realized what we were doing and why we were there, that we were trying to bring their father's killer to justice, then they kind of relented and let us get in and look around. And it's very important when you're a trial lawyer to go to the scene of the crime at some point, so that you can get in your head the geography, because that becomes it could become a very important piece of part of the questioning, both in terms of the defense as well as the prosecution. Because if the defense tries to use something that they say is part of this geography, and it's not correct, and you have been there and say, well, no, it's not that color, it's this color because I was there and saw it, then that's a very important thing. And that's why we went. And it was so eye-opening to me about how much this cop's betrayal of these people had the effect it had on them was just incredible. And you know what? He lived down the block. The cop, his name was Cabeza, Robert Cabeza. He lived down the block from the liquor store. He probably, he was seen walking around that neighborhood all the time. It was his own neighborhood. And so the Caracap and Ippolito betrayal, and that's what I call it, to not only the citizens, but to his fellow cops and to everybody, every law enforcement person in the entire country was enormous. The betrayal was beyond belief. And the thing is that when I spoke to Gaspipe, he told me that he had brought all of this to the attention of the FBI years before it came to me, years. And all they were concerned about was, well, this guy's not so great. He'll, if we give him any kind of credit at all, then we may lose the case against Gotti, which was a ridiculous thought for them to have, in my opinion. So they let two murderers with a badge kind of escape. If it hadn't been for Tommy and I to start this thing, they would have escaped all of the scrutiny that they had. They would have escaped any kind of punishment, never paid for the murders that they committed, and never paid for that betrayal. So it was very satisfying for me, even though the conviction was had in another courthouse and I wasn't part of it. It was a good day when I heard that they were convicted. I got to tell you one little kind of anecdote. You probably read it if you got the later edition of the book. We have an epilogue of me going to Butner to talk to Gaspipe, and when we I said to him, did you read the book? He said, yeah, I read the book. I said, so? He goes, you're about 98% accurate on everything. I took that as a great, a good thing, because, hey, I wasn't there. I'm just depending on other people telling me.
That's pretty solid.
It was pretty good. It was pretty good. And when he told me that he wanted to be a part of this and that his lawyer was the guy who was the obstructionist, I was so upset. And the lawyer, by that point, by the time that I had interviewed Gaspipe years later, his lawyer had passed away. So I couldn't even call him on the phone and yell at him.
Dude, that's where it gets hairy. Because back to The Departed, right? They find out, and it's like, Frankie's an FBI informant, and it's just like, oh shit. And at the very end, when Matt Damon's like, did you give me up? And he's like, I didn't give anybody up that wasn't going down anyway. And you just realize, like, shit, like, cops died, undercover cops died, because it just goes so much higher up. You kind of get that with the lawyer saying, like, you got to do this, and the feds being like, we don't want to do this because it will fuck up Sammy the Bull's testimony. And it just goes higher and higher up, and it gets like, it's got me thinking, like, and this is all wild speculation, but it's, again, this is wild speculation, but it's, like the idea that, like, we intercepted the Japanese Navy's movements on Pearl Harbor, but we were realizing that just through FDR's Lend-Lease program to the UK, that wasn't enough to keep Hitler and the Axis powers at bay, and eventually it was going to come to our shore, so the whole conspiracy goes. And as a conspiracy guy, this isn't even one of my favorite ones. The idea that we let Pearl Harbor happen, that's why we had the ships next to each other, because it was like, now we can go get them. But it's, I mean, what if that's the case? What if you're an NSA... what if you're intercepting this shit and you're like, we got this thing, and it's like, hey, you know, it's bigger machines at work, and it's like, don't even get in here.
It would be awful, Tom. It would be awful. It would be awful.
But I mean, I look at, if we can see it and we know for a fact it happened in your experiences, I mean, you kind of got to, is it a fractal? Does it repeat on bigger and bigger levels? I mean, again, wild speculation, but one thing I've always thought is like, man, if you got, let's say you're not in the mob, but let's say you're in like the tech mob, let's say you're Microsoft, and you've got your Eppolito and Carrie Kappa in the NSA, and maybe you're going, hey, I want you guys to go pull over Tim Cook of Apple. No one else can get into Apple security, but when the NSA comes knocking with a national security warrant, he goes, oh shit, and he comes in and he goes, oh no, we're not doing anything with the Chinese, we're just working on this new touchscreen. How do you not know that these NSA guys are just, you know, okay, new touchscreen, you're using this, you're using that, slip that to Microsoft, they pay you $10 million because they're going to get $10 billion in profit. I mean, is there NSA corporate espionage? And again, these are giant leaps from like Brooklyn dirty cops, but if it can happen there, why can't
giant leaps? But not impossible.
Not impossible. Know? And for the record, I'm not speaking for Mike. These are my wild conspiracies.
Yeah. So let me tell you some of the good news with this. You know, I don't know if I certainly don't talk about this in the book, but since the book came out, you know, I sold this to various Hollywood entities 4 times. This story, and Warner Brothers was the first studio that bought it, and I'll never forget the pitch that I did with them, and they were so excited, and they even had an ending of me standing up in front of the federal the press conference at federal court and telling him who really did the case. You know, that was the way they were going to end this thing, you know. So they then, after the option ran out, they didn't renew it. They said they didn't have the money. We sold it to Mark Cuban's Mark Cuban's company. 2929 Productions. That didn't work out. Then we sold it again. Actually, 3 times. Sold it again. But now I got to tell you, Tom, I get a call out of the blue in the middle of the pandemic from the book agent who sold the book to. We did this with, let's see, who was it? It was HarperCollins who published Friends of the Family. So our book agent calls me and says, Mike, you're not going to believe this, but I got a check for you. I said, a check for what? He said, there's a big Hollywood guy that's wants to option the book. He's got a plan for a TV series. He's since signed Terry Winter, who is the guy who was the creator of Boardwalk Empire, was one of the head writers of The Sopranos, the guy who wrote the Wolf of Wall Street. Yeah, he's part of the team now. So we're keeping our fingers crossed that maybe one of these days I'll be calling you to talk about the premiere and when the premiere is going to happen. So
that would be the best thing ever. If you have to,
it'd be great.
I call dibs on being your +1 at the red carpet premiere.
Thank you.
I want to be there. That's badass, man. Because that could legitimately be. I mean, that's as sexy of a story as Departed. I mean, because
without a doubt, it's real. Yeah, the idea is to Terry was one of the. Terry actually wrote one of the scripts during all of these various buyers. The first person who wrote the script was a guy named Keir Pearson. He won the Academy Award for Hotel Rwanda. Mm-hmm. There was and it just never went anywhere. Then Terry wrote it, and Terry did a very, very good job. Wrote it very much faithful. It was very faithful to the book. And Hollywood being Hollywood, they said to him, well, there's not enough of this, there's not enough of that. So he had to rewrite it where he had my friend Tommy up in a helicopter with Eppolito, surrounding. There was a threat against the Statue of Liberty.
Fuck that.
So ridiculous. So I'm so happy that he's back, because he wrote the best script of all of the ones that were written. He wrote the best one, and now he's back, and we're keeping our fingers crossed that we get a studio who'll buy it, and they're looking to do like a 10-part series, one of those kinds of things. So we'll see. I'll certainly keep you posted, so that way, we can talk about it at one day. That would be great. So.
Fuck yeah! And if you get like DiCaprio to star in it, I demand DiCaprio come on. Even if for 5 minutes, I want him to come on.
Yeah, I'll get you. I'll talk him into it.
Good.
So we'll see.
I did want to say, before we wrap up, there was 2 lines that, or not. One was a line. One was the one line that made me laugh pretty hard was they got along about as well as a cat and a Chinese chef. I thought that was funny. I'm keeping that one. And the other one was just the guy that just always had these little businesses, and he's just always trying to scrap together a buck. And how one of them it took such a wild turn where it was like he was trying to sell like psoriasis skincare lotion to people in Africa, but his chemist left out an ingredient, so it turned like to sludge. And then to recoup his cost, the chemist was it went very quickly from 0 to 100. He's like, well, I know we were trying to make that lotion, but I can cook you meth. And he was like, all right. It's just like, holy shit. It just,
yeah.
I had to touch on that, because that I actually laughed out loud. It was like, that went from 0 to 100 very, it turned to sludge. I can make you crystal meth. And it's like, so we got into that. So Jesus, but.
Yeah, that was, I think that was in Vegas, right? When they were in Vegas, yeah. So they made as it turns out, because of their drug operation in Vegas, if you want to even call it that. It wasn't, it's not like it was a cartel or anything.
Yeah.
But those little deals together was really enough for the federal court to say, yeah, there was a continuing enterprise, and that's what allowed the RICO case to stand up. So, and they got life in prison. So it was. It was not enough. They were greedy from the day they got together, Tom, and that greed basically led them into prison and now into the grave. So it's
right.
And believe me, it couldn't have happened to 2 nicer guys, 2 more worthy guys. They were real scumbags. They really were.
It's like the millionaire celebrity that gets caught shoplifting, and it's like they don't need the money, they don't need the thing. It's just it's the greed, it's the rush of getting away with it, and that's it's right. It's almost cheesy how like stereotypical of like it's the same trope you see in like ancient writing, and it's like they just they had to keep pushing it, and eventually they got fucked. Last thing,
yes,
and again, wild speculation. Do you think there are other police in anywhere in America, we'll keep it to America, past or present, that are a Caracappa and Eppolito? Do you think that they are still out? The guys, maybe, are there, shootings, right? The no-knock warrants that, how many of those, maybe this is just my sexy, shitty Hollywood mind, how many of those are hits?
I think if there were, and there's certainly anything, I'll say this, anything is possible, okay? That's the way I'll answer it. But I don't believe that it's the kind of, that type of problem manifests itself in, a police shooting of somebody, with a no-knock warrant or something like that. That's not the kind of thing that these guys were into. These guys were into major corruption in the sense that they were being paid, as you joked about before, they were on retainer with the mob for information, and they did the hits as a sidelight. So they were planned hits. The Eddie Leno thing was totally planned. They knew where he was going. They knew what road he was taking. They knew, exactly what would happen when they pulled him over. you can't compare that to someone who does a no-knock warrant, breaks in and winds up shooting somebody. I don't believe it's analogous. Is it possible that he does it that way if he's a corrupt cop and that's how he winds up killing a mark? Maybe. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised, but it's not something that I think is likely. Sure. I think that it's if they're going to do this, if there are guys doing this, it's more planned, certainly bigger money. And a much more insidious way of operating, as opposed to, the kind of situation where it's, as you put it, knock on the door, bust in and somebody gets shot. That's not the way it would work. Yeah. It's a different kind of thing. But I look, the mob is still in play. Many mobs are still in play, in addition to the Italians, to the mafia. There are all kinds of mobs out there, from Eastern European to Asian to Jamaican to all kinds of things, drug cartels, etc. So, is there a temptation out there for a cop who's making $40,000 a year, $50,000 a year to take money because he's got maybe a kid at home who is sick and needs help? Of course the temptation's there. It's not something that's beyond the realm of possibility. So I'll leave it at that. Look at the guy I talked about, that guy Cabeza. Mm-hmm. You know what why he did these robberies? He didn't do just this robbery. I think in Crooked Brooklyn, I talk about when the cops did the perp walk with him after we arrested him on the murder, their switchboard blew up in the police department. Why? He had held up a restaurant in Manhattan a year before, in which he robbed every patron in the restaurant of their wallets, their keys, their watches, etc. And he was never caught. And when he was seen on TV in the perp walk, all of the patrons in the restaurant said, "That's the guy. That's the guy." Yeah, he wound up getting, on top of my 25 to life, he wound up getting a series of penalties of jail sentences for each of the people that he robbed in that case, that restaurant in Manhattan. Now, what was his reason? The guy liked fast cars. He liked to live a high life. That was his thing. So he needed somehow to supplement his income, and that's how he did it. So,
you feel like those guys supplementing their income would have just gone into the mob from the first place. Yeah. It's like, dude, just go do it full time. Not only that, these guys have the guts and to go and do this shit, when their lives are on the line. Why not put that, I know I sound just like a sheltered white kid, but why not put that work ethic into going to become a pharmacist?
You're right. And how stupid is this guy Cabeza to rob a store down the block from where he lives?
Retarded.
And that left, and it's bad enough to do a robbery. That would have been a lot of time for him.
Yeah,
he has to kill the owner of the restaurant, the liquor store. That made it, that compounded the number of years that he wound up getting, and sad. And he broke up that family, and all the poor guy behind the counter was doing was helping out a cop to use the bathroom.
That's what I mean. It's like that. You all subsidize that.
Yeah.
Right. Every time there's a shooting of an unarmed black man, it's like everyone subsidizes that. So now when Bob Smith shows up at my door and he's like, "Hey, can we talk?" My first instinct is like, "You can come back with a warrant, but get the fuck out of here." And it's like, that might be the most stand-up officer ever. Right. And it's
exactly. We all suffer because of the bad guys. That's what happens. We all, and believe it or not, all of the good cops, 99.9%, suffer as a result of that as well, because they all get painted with the same brush, which is unfair. Or at least if they don't get painted with the same brush, they get painted with a piece of that brush. And that's what is so horrible and so bad. And, I got to tell you, with the Cabeza case, the guys that did the investigation with me were not internal affairs. They were the cops from the precinct, the detectives from the precinct that this guy lived in and did the robbery in. They were so angry and so intent on making sure that we got the right guy, and when we got him good, that it was eye-opening. They were terrific in terms of the cooperation that we had, but it was cops from his precinct and not internal affairs who did that case. So,
dirty fuckers.
Yeah, they knew it. So,
when's your next book coming out? I know you said you're working on it.
Since we last spoke, I turned it in. The publisher tells me end of the summer, maybe beginning of the fall, which is good because beginning of the fall is kind of like a buying time for books, and it's getting close to the Christmas time and stuff. So that's and it will be an audiobook. The big contract, the big part of that contract was the audiobook part. So
you gotta do audio. You gotta do audio.
Yeah. It's called Homicide is My Business. Luigi the Zip, a hitman's quest for honor. That's the name of the book. So, but that was his line when he testified in front of Congress. He said, Senator, homicide is my business. And so we decided to use that as the title. And I unless the publishers change it, I don't think they will. I think it's a very catchy title. And we have some pretty good suggestions for a cover for it. So
I just thought of something when we were. I don't know if kept you 30 minutes longer than I said it would, but
it's all right.
I was just thinking how I was saying, granted it's all fantastic and it's extrapolating to astronomical theoretical situations of, could this thing happen on bigger and bigger scales? And it's like, we don't know, but anything's possible. I was just thinking, I read a book last month, actually, where I listened to it several times. It's about General Smedley Darlington Butler, who retired in 1933. He went from an enlisted man to a major general. He helped as a Republican, he helped go on the campaign trail with FDR and campaigned for him to get in. So I believe the most decorated armed services member in American history. World War I, the Caribbean interventions, Chinese interventions. When he got out, he said that it was kind of like a military-industrial complex speech that Eisenhower gave on his last day in office. He kind of gave that same speech almost 30 years before, in 1933. And he said, war is a racket. And I won't read it right now, but basically goes in and says, having gone from the bottom to the tippy top, he was like, I can now say that he was like, unfortunately, he's like, unless we're defending our shores or the Bill of Rights, our shores, our borders, or the Bill of Rights, it's a racket. And he's like, going to South America, and we got to topple these nations. He's like, we're doing it for whatever, the Dole banana. He's like, when I go into the Middle East and we got to take out this Shah, he's like, I'm doing this for Standard Oil. And he's like, I start to learn, he's like, I got to go protect American Wall Street interests in China so they're not molested by the Chinese army. And he goes, I'm starting to realize that, I have a flag and armed forces with matching uniforms, but he's like, I'm just a henchman. And I think his quote at the end was, I could have given Al Capone some pointers. He operated in three counties. I operated on 3 continents. Right. But I was just thinking, it's not the same because Caricap and Eppolito were conscious of it and they knew what they were doing, whereas he kind of realized this in hindsight as an old man with all of his wisdom. But I mean, it goes all the way up to the level of war and intervention was they were doing it as a front for these, to the point where Prescott Bush, the grandfather of George Bush, as well as J.P. Morgan and a couple other guys, actually tried to bribe Smedley Butler to use a bunch of veterans to overthrow the White House and remove FDR. And it's called the Business Plot, with a capital B and a capital P. We never learned about it in school, but there was an attempted fascist coup in 1933. Smedley Butler, being a diehard American, said in probably more formal terms, fuck you, but they didn't do it. But I was just thinking, there's an example to the point where they wanted to use this guy to overthrow FDR, It is kind of, it's Eppolito and Caracappa. It's not the same, but it's kind of the same. But I was just thinking, like, oh wait, there is an example of that happening. That didn't really have anything to do with this, but I had to get that.
It's okay. Hey, listen, if you don't mind, I want to just tell you talk about Crooked Brooklyn and now Friends of the Family. Mm-hmm. I have 2 short stories that I did, and I think you guys, your audience would really like both of them.
Okay.
They're on Amazon. They're probably Kindle shorts, but there might be you can read a Kindle story without having a Kindle device.
Yeah.
By downloading it. One of them is called Handed a Killer. And the other is called Murder on the Bridge, and they're both cases that I did, and I think that they're not mob cases, but they're interesting in the sense that there was a reason for the killing on the bridge, and there was a reason for this. The Handed a Killer, it's the killing of a young mother on her way home from shopping, and what happens it's in the middle of Crown Heights during a time when there was a lot of turmoil between the Black and Caribbean community and the Jewish community, and she was killed by a Caribbean guy, and the way that we did the case and what ultimately solved it, I think will really fascinate your audience. So that one, and the other case, the Murder on the Bridge, was coincidentally another young Jewish girl who was walking, trying to lose weight on the Williamsburg Bridge, and is encountered by a junkie. And to me, and I know this is going to sound kind of hokey, but to me, he was like the personification of the devil come to Brooklyn for the way that he did and what he did to her, and to ultimately also his best friend, who he used and then killed, believe it or not, to get away from, to get out of what he had done. And the way he gets caught is also interesting, because there's someone who was close to him who betrays him, and the way he's betrayed is interesting. She thinks that the cops are asking about murder number 1. Instead, they're asking about murder number 2, and she starts talking about murder number 1, and they say, "What? What are you talking about? We're not looking for him. He did that too." And so Murder on the Bridge and Handed a Killer, and they're both on Amazon. 99 cents. You really can't do it's all cost for each one of the stories.
Well, let's do an episode for each of them.
I'd be happy to, because
sounds cool,
Tom. It's a great. They're terrific stories, and I got to tell you that there are 2 cases that I really kind of put my heart and soul in terms of the investigation as well as the trial, and they both have an interesting twist to them that I really believe your listeners and the readers will love. So
Let's do it. That sounds awesome. Send me the links for those, and we'll set up some dates to do them. And,
I will do that. I'll do that.
Yeah.
All right. So you let me know when you want to, and I'll be back. Sure. I love talking to you. So
yeah, man. Well, I love having you on, dude. You're a cool guy. As I tell everyone, this is a one-man show. When I invite guests on, there's no charity guest. He keeps having that guy on because the owners. I have on people who I want to have on. So if you're on the show, it's because I like talking to you. And if you're not on the show, I don't know, do the math. So it's pretty simple. But yeah, man, you're a badass guy. I love having you on. Thank you for your time. I did see you were on Don the Pleb. Don's a cool guy. I hope you enjoyed that.
Yeah, I did. I did. Waiting to hear from him again. He wants me to come back and talk a little bit more about the body snatcher. So we'll talk about that a little bit. So
Don's as real as they get. Don's a badass.
Yeah, that's cool.
All right, man. Well, thank you, Mike. Book will be in the description. Stick it in the top comment. It's a fantastic read. It's absolutely terrifying. I wouldn't blame anyone if you just want to keep your head in the sand, or if you want to dive deep into it. Go get it. It's badass. You can play it on your phone. You just go to General Settings, Accessibility, Spoken Content. You can get your phone to read it to you. But aside from that, it's a great book. Description, stick in the top comment, and Mike will be back with those 2 short stories.
Take care. Bye-bye, Tommy.
All right, man. You have a good one.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.